Dr. Sarah Chen stepped off the transport ship and felt the soft ground beneath her boots. The forest moon of Kepler 442c was nothing like Earth. Giant trees reached toward two small suns that painted everything in golden light. The air smelled of flowers and something wild that made her think of wolves. Sarah was a doctor who studied alien life. She had come here with 12 other humans to meet the Kythera for the first time. The Kythera looked like huge wolves that walked on two legs. They had thick fur, sharp teeth, and bright yellow eyes. They were smart like humans but lived in packs like wild animals. The leader of the human team was Ambassador Rodriguez. He was a thin man who worried about everything. "Remember," he told Sarah for the 10th time, "we must follow their rules exactly. One mistake could ruin everything." Sarah nodded but kept looking at the forest. She could hear sounds in the distance, howls and barks that seemed to have meaning. The Kythera were talking to each other in their own way. A group of Kythera came out of the trees to meet them. They walked in a line with the biggest one in front. The leader was huge, almost 8 feet tall. His fur was dark gray with silver streaks. His name was Vexthar, and he was the alpha of this territory. Vexthar stopped in front of Ambassador Rodriguez. He did not bow or shake hands. He just stared with those yellow eyes. "Humans," he said in rough English. "You come to our home. You follow our ways." "Of course," Rodriguez said quickly. "We are honored to be here." Sarah watched the other Kythera. They all stood behind their alpha in perfect order. None of them looked directly at Vexthar's face. She could see smaller Kythera hiding in the trees. Those must be the cubs, the young ones. The Kythera led them to a clearing where they had built simple shelters for the humans. The buildings were made of wood and looked like they grew from the forest itself. Sarah was amazed at how beautiful they were. That evening, Vexthar invited the humans to watch a hunting ceremony. The Kythera would hunt a large beast called a thornback to celebrate the meeting between their peoples. The hunt began at sunset. Sarah watched from a safe distance as 20 Kythera warriors moved through the forest like ghosts. They communicated with small sounds and hand signals. Vexthar led from the front, his massive form moving with surprising grace. The thornback was a creature the size of a small elephant. It had thick armor-like skin and long spikes on its back. The Kythera surrounded it carefully, working together like parts of one mind. Everything went wrong in an instant. The thornback charged faster than anyone expected. It broke through the circle of hunters and went straight for Vexthar. The alpha tried to dodge, but the beast was too quick. One of its long claws caught him across the left side of his face. Vexthar fell backward with a roar of pain. Blood poured from a deep cut that ran from his ear to his jaw. The other hunters quickly killed the thornback, but their attention was on their wounded leader. Sarah started to run toward him, but Ambassador Rodriguez grabbed her arm. "No," he whispered. "You cannot interfere." "He's hurt badly," Sarah said. "I can help him. It's forbidden, Dr. Kythera warned us. Only blood family can touch an alpha's wounds. It's their law." Dr. Kythera was the Kythera who had taught them about the local customs. She had been very clear about the rules. But Sarah could see that Vexthar was losing too much blood. The Kythera gathered around their alpha but kept their distance. None of them tried to help him. They looked scared and confused. Dr. Kythera approached the humans with her ears low against her head. "The alpha is badly injured," she said sadly, "but there is nothing we can do. He has no living blood family. No one can touch his wounds." "That's crazy," Sarah said. "He'll die without medical help." "It is our way," Dr. Kythera replied. "If an alpha shows weakness, others will challenge him. If outsiders touch his wounds, he loses all honor. Better to die than live in shame." Sarah watched Vexthar try to stand. He was clearly in pain, but he would not show it. Blood still flowed from the deep cut on his face. It would leave a terrible scar if it healed at all. The other Kythera began to move away from their alpha. Sarah realized they were giving him space to die with dignity. Even the cubs in the trees had gone silent. "This is wrong," Sarah muttered. Ambassador Rodriguez heard her. "Dr. Chen, I know you want to help, but we cannot risk the entire mission. There are millions of lives depending on this alliance." Sarah knew he was right. The Kythera controlled this part of space. If humans wanted to travel through their territory, they needed permission. If they wanted to trade, they needed friendship. One wrong move could start a war, but she was a doctor. She had taken an oath to help those who were hurt, no matter who they were. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She lay in her shelter listening to the sounds of the forest. She could hear the Kithara moving around their wounded alpha. They were taking turns standing guard, but they could not help him heal. She got up and looked out her window. In the moonlight, she could see Vexthar sitting alone by a small fire. He held one hand against his wounded face. Even from far away, she could tell he was getting worse. Dr. Kithara had explained more about Kithara society during their lessons. Alphas were everything to their packs. They made all important decisions. They protected their people. They decided who lived and who died, but if an alpha was too weak to lead, other alphas would come to challenge him. They would fight until one of them was dead. The winner would take over the pack. The loser's family would be scattered or killed. Vexthar had over 200 Kithara in his pack. If he died or lost his position, all of them would suffer. The cubs would be most at risk. Other packs might kill them to remove future threats. Sarah knew the human medical kit had antibiotics that would stop any infection. She had surgical tools that could clean the wound properly. She had synthetic skin that would help it heal without a scar. All she had to do was walk over there and help him. But that would break every rule the Kithara had. It would probably end the peace talks. It might even start a war between humans and Kithara. Sarah looked at her medical bag sitting in the corner. Inside were all the tools she needed to save a life. Outside was an alien leader who was dying because of ancient laws that made no sense to her. She thought about her oath as a doctor. She thought about the mission. She thought about the cubs hiding in the trees, waiting to see if their protector would live or die. The night was long and Sarah did not sleep at all. Morning came too soon. Sarah woke up feeling tired and worried. She looked out her window and saw Vexthar still sitting by the dead fire. His hand was pressed against his face and she could see dried blood on his fur. The other humans were already awake. Ambassador Rodriguez called a meeting in the main shelter. Everyone looked serious and scared. "The situation is getting worse," Rodriguez said. "Dr. Kithara told me that other alphas are already asking questions. If Vexthar cannot lead his pack, they will come to challenge him." "How long do we have?" asked Dr. Martinez, the team's other medical officer. "Maybe 2 days. Maybe less. Word travels fast among the Kithara. They can smell weakness from miles away." Sarah felt sick. What happens to his pack if he loses? The new alpha will decide. Some might be allowed to join the winning pack. Others will be driven away or killed. The cubs are always at risk. Through the window, Sarah could see young Kithara playing near the edge of the forest. They looked like puppy wolves, tumbling and wrestling with each other. But they stayed far from where their alpha sat alone. "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said. Rodriguez shook his head. "We've been over this," Dr. Kithara was very clear. "Touching an alpha's wounds is either a challenge to fight or a sign of complete surrender. There is no middle ground." "What if I challenge him?" Sarah asked suddenly. Everyone stared at her. "Are you crazy?" Martinez said. "He's 8 feet tall and weighs 300 pounds. He has claws and fangs. You'd be dead in seconds. But maybe the fight doesn't have to be to the death. Maybe if I challenge him and then immediately surrender, it would let me touch his wounds as a sign of giving up." Dr. Kithara, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "That would not work. If you challenge and surrender, you become property of the pack. You would have to serve for life. And still, touching the alpha's scar would only be allowed for cleaning, not healing." Sarah felt frustrated. Every path seemed blocked by ancient rules that put honor above life. Around noon, everything changed. A messenger arrived from the Eastern Territory. He was a young Kithara with black fur and bright green eyes. He spoke quickly to Dr. Kithara in their barking language. Dr. Kithara's ears went flat against her head. She turned to the humans with fear in her eyes. "Alpha Korthak is coming," she said. "He leads the largest pack in the eastern lands. He has heard about Vexthar's injury. He will be here by evening." "To help?" Sarah asked hopefully. "To challenge. If Vexthar cannot fight, Korthak will kill him and take over this territory. It is the way things have always been." Sarah watched through the window as the news spread among Vexthar's pack. The adult Kithara moved closer to their alpha, forming protective circles. But they still could not touch him or help him heal. Vexthar himself seemed to know what was coming. He stood up slowly and tested his balance. The wound on his face had gotten worse overnight. Sarah could see signs of infection starting. The edges of the cut were red and swollen. That afternoon, Vexthar tried to practice fighting moves. He swung his claws at imaginary enemies and tested his reflexes. But the injury slowed him down. He stumbled twice and had to catch himself against a tree. The cubs stopped playing. They gathered in small groups and watched their alpha with wide, frightened eyes. Some of the younger ones started making soft whimpering sounds. By evening, Sarah could hear the howls of Korthak's pack approaching from the east. They sounded like war songs full of threat and challenge. Vexthar's pack answered with their own howls, but theirs sounded defensive and afraid. Ambassador Rodriguez gathered the humans together. "We need to stay out of sight during the challenge. Do not interfere no matter what happens." "That's an order." Sarah nodded, but her hand moved to her medical bag. She had been carrying it with her all day. Korthak arrived as the suns were setting. He was even bigger than Vexthar, with thick black fur and scars covering his arms and chest. Behind him came 50 of his strongest warriors. They spread out in a semicircle, ready to fight if needed. "Vexithar of the Silver Moon Pack," Korthak called out in a voice like thunder. "I smell blood and weakness." "I claim the right of challenge," Vexthar stepped forward. His hand was no longer covering his wound, but Sarah could see how much it hurt him to move. "I am still Alpha here, Korthak. If you want my territory, you must take it from me." The two huge Cathera began to circle each other. Sarah watched from her hiding place behind a tree. She could see that Vexthar was trying to keep his injured side away from his opponent. The fight began fast and brutal. Korthak was fresh and strong. Vexthar was hurt and tired. Within minutes, it was clear who would win. Korthak's claws raked across Vexthar's chest, leaving 3 deep cuts. Vexthar tried to counterattack, but he was too slow. The infected wound on his face was affecting his balance and vision. Sarah watched Vexthar fall to one knee. Around the clearing, his pack members were making sounds of distress. The cubs had gone completely silent, pressing themselves against the ground. Korthak raised his claws for the killing blow. Sarah was moving before she realized it. Her medical bag was in her hands, and her feet were carrying her into the clearing. She heard Ambassador Rodriguez shouting her name, but she did not stop. "Wait," she yelled. Both alphas froze. Every Kithera in the clearing turned to stare at the small human who had just interrupted their sacred challenge. Sarah ran to Vexithar and dropped to her knees beside him. Without thinking, she reached out and placed both hands directly on his wounded face. The silence was complete. Not even the wind made a sound. Sarah felt the heat of infection under her fingers. The wound was worse than she had thought. If she did not treat it soon, Vexithar would die whether Korthak killed him or not. She opened her medical bag and began to work. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic. She applied antibiotic gel to fight the infection. She used synthetic skin to cover the deepest part of the cut. All around her, 200 Kithera watched in complete silence. She could feel their eyes on her, but she focused on her patient. Vexthar's fever was high. Sarah gave him a shot of human antibiotics, hoping they would work on Kithera biology. She had studied their medical files during the trip, and their systems were similar enough to human ones. When she finished, she looked up. Every single Kithera was staring at her with expressions she could not read. Fear, anger, confusion. Then she noticed something strange. All around the clearing, every cub in sight had lowered their ears flat against their heads. They had dropped to the ground and were lying on their bellies. Their tails were tucked under their bodies, and they were making soft whimpering sounds. It was a position Sarah had never seen before. Not submission to an alpha. Not fear of punishment. Something else entirely. Korthak spoke first, his voice full of shock. What is this? The cubs? Why do they? Dr. Kithara stepped forward, her own ears low and confused. I do not know. This behavior, it is not in our laws. It is not in our history. The younglings respond to something I have never seen. Sarah looked down at Vexithar. His fever was already beginning to break. The infection would be gone by morning, but she realized she might have just started a war between species. I'm sorry, she said to the gathered Kithera. I know I broke your laws, but I couldn't watch him die when I could save him. She stood up slowly, waiting for claws or fangs to tear her apart. Instead, the cubs continued their strange behavior, and the adults looked more confused than angry. Something had changed. Sarah had touched the alpha's scar, and the reaction was nothing like what anyone expected. The night after Sarah touched Vexthar's scar was the strangest in Kithra memory. Word spread across the forest moon faster than wildfire. Every pack within 100 miles heard the same impossible story. A human had touched an alpha's wound. The cubs had responded with a behavior no adult had ever seen, and the injured alpha was healing instead of dying. Sarah sat in her shelter, unable to sleep. Through her window she could see Cathara messengers arriving every few hours. They came from different territories, different packs, all wanting to know if the story was true. Dr. Cathara had not spoken to any of the humans since the incident. She spent the night moving between different groups of her people, trying to understand what had happened. Ambassador Rodriguez was furious. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked Sarah for the 10th time. "We could have a war on our hands." "Vexithar is alive," Sarah replied quietly. "His fever broke completely. The infection is gone. He'll be fully healed in a few days. That doesn't matter if the other alphas decide we're a threat to their way of life." Sarah looked out the window again. Vexithar was standing near the fire, talking with his senior pack members. He moved normally now, without pain. The wound on his face was already closing, leaving only a thin line where the scar would be. But the cubs were still acting strange. All through the night, young Cathara from different packs had been arriving. They came with their parents or pack leaders, but once they got close to the human camp, they all did the same thing. They lowered their ears, lay down flat against the ground, and made soft whimpering sounds. None of the adults could explain it. Dr. Martinez had been watching the cubs through his research equipment. "Their brain activity is off the charts," he told Sarah. "Something about your scent or actions is triggering a response in their developing minds." "What kind of response?" "I don't know. It's like they recognize something that the adults can't sense." By morning, representatives from 5 different packs had arrived. Sarah watched them through her window as they met with Vexithar and Dr. Cathara. The conversations looked intense, with lots of growling and aggressive postures. 2 of the visiting alphas were clearly angry. Sarah could hear them barking angrily in the Cathara language. They pointed toward the human camp several times, and their body language suggested they wanted to fight. But 3 other alphas seemed more curious than angry. They kept looking at the cubs, who continued their strange behavior whenever Sarah was nearby. Around noon, Dr. Cathara finally came to speak with the humans. She looked tired and confused. "My people are divided," she said. "Some believe the human has committed a great crime. They want you punished according to our laws." "What would that mean?" Ambassador Rodriguez asked nervously. "Death or slavery. There is no middle punishment for touching an alpha's scar without permission." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But," Dr. Cathara continued, "others believe something unprecedented has happened. The behavior of the cubs is unknown in our history. Some of our oldest pack leaders are saying it reminds them of ancient stories." "What kind of stories?" Sarah asked. Dr. Cathara hesitated. "Legends. Myths that we tell our young ones. Stories of the time before, when our people lived differently." She sat down heavily, her ears still low with confusion. "According to the old tales, there was once a being called the Gentle Fang. This creature could heal without causing pain, lead without using force, and protect without showing aggression. The stories say that when the Gentle Fang appeared, all cubs would recognize its nature and show a sign of peace." Sarah felt her heart beating faster. What happened to the Gentle Fang? "It was only a legend, a myth to teach young ones about kindness. But the behavior of our cubs, it matches the old stories perfectly." That afternoon, 3 more pack leaders arrived. These were the most powerful alphas from the northern territories. Sarah watched them through her window as they examined the cubs, who were still lying flat on the ground near the human camp. One of the new arrivals was an ancient female alpha named Morgatha. She was smaller than the male alphas, but carried herself with the authority of someone who had survived many battles. Her fur was almost completely gray, and her eyes held the wisdom of long years. Morgatha spent an hour watching the cubs. She called some of the older Cathara to her side and spoke with them in low, serious tones. Finally, she approached the human camp. "I would speak with the human who touched Vexithar's scar," she said in careful English. Ambassador Rodriguez tried to step forward, but Morgatha held up a clawed hand. "Only the healer. Only the one who broke our laws." Sarah came out of her shelter slowly. As soon as she appeared, every cub in sight repeated their strange behavior. Ears flat, bodies pressed to the ground, soft whimpering sounds. Morgatha watched this with sharp attention. "Tell me, human, why did you touch the wound?" "Because he was hurt and I could help him," Sarah replied honestly. "You knew it was forbidden. You knew it could mean your death." "Yes, And still you chose to heal rather than follow our laws? Sarah nodded. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to help people who are suffering. It doesn't matter what species they are. Morgatha studied her for a long moment. Show me your hands. Sarah held out her hands, palms up. Morgatha leaned forward and sniffed them carefully. Her yellow eyes grew wide. Impossible, she whispered. What is it? Dr. Kethara asked, approaching them. The scent. It carries no aggression, no dominance, no submission, only... Morgatha struggled to find the words. Only the desire to heal. I have never smelled such a thing from any creature. More Kithara began to gather around them. Sarah noticed that even some of the adults were starting to show submissive postures when they got close to her. Not the full laying down behavior of the cubs, but lowered heads and relaxed shoulders. This cannot be, growled Korthak, the alpha who had come to challenge Vexthar, a creature that heals without seeking advantage. It goes against nature itself. But even as he spoke, Sarah could see him struggling. His aggressive posture was softening despite his words. Something about her presence was affecting him too. Vexithar himself finally approached the group. The scar on his face was now just a thin white line, barely visible through his fur. He moved with his full strength restored. I owe this human my life, he said formally. She could have let me die and watched Korthak take my territory. Instead, she risked everything to save me. It changes nothing, snarled one of the angry alphas from the eastern packs. Laws are laws. Traditions must be upheld. And yet, Morgatha said quietly, the cubs know something we do not. They respond to this human as they would to the gentle fang of legend. Perhaps our laws need to change when faced with something new. The argument that followed was unlike anything in Kithara history. Alphas who had been enemies for generations found themselves agreeing with each other. Others who had been allies argued fiercely over what Sarah's actions meant. But through it all, the cubs continued their strange behavior. And slowly, more adults began to show signs of the same response. Not complete submission, but a kind of peaceful recognition that none of them could explain. Sarah realized that her simple act of healing had touched something deep in the Kithara mind. Something buried under thousands of years of survival and violence. Something that remembered a gentler way of living. The question now was whether that memory was strong enough to overcome their laws and traditions, or whether it would be crushed by those who feared change. As the sun set on the second day since she had touched Vexthar's scar, Sarah knew that the fate of both species might depend on the answer. The third day brought unexpected visitors. 3 ships landed in the forest clearing, carrying human scientists and Kithara scholars from across the galaxy. News of the incident had reached the highest levels of both governments. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped off the lead ship. She was the head of xenopsychology for the Human Federation and had studied alien behavior for 30 years. Behind her came Professor Ithlak, the most respected Kithara historian in known space. Dr. Chen, Vasquez said as she approached Sarah, you may have triggered the most significant shift in alien behavior we've ever recorded. Sarah felt overwhelmed. I just wanted to help an injured person, and in doing so, you may have unlocked something that's been sleeping in the Kithara mind for millennia. Professor Ithlak was already examining the cubs who continued their strange behavior near Sarah. He was an elderly Kithara with silver fur and kind eyes. Unlike the other adults, he showed no signs of aggression or dominance. Fascinating, he murmured as he watched a group of young ones from different packs lying peacefully together. In normal circumstances, cubs from rival territories would never interact like this. Over the next few hours, both human and Kithara scientists ran tests. They studied brain scans of the cubs, analyzed Sarah's scent, and examined the behavioral patterns they were seeing. Dr. Martinez shared his readings with the new arrivals. The cubs' neural activity spikes whenever Dr. Chen is nearby. But it's not fear or stress. It's more like recognition. Professor Ithlak nodded thoughtfully. I have been researching our oldest legends since I heard about this incident. The stories of the Gentle Fang go back to our earliest recorded history. They describe a being that could calm the most violent warriors and heal the deepest wounds. But those are just myths, protested Dr. Kethara. Are they? Ithlak replied. What if they are genetic memories? What if our ancestors really did encounter such beings long ago? Dr. Vasquez pulled out a portable genetic scanner. With your permission, Dr. Chen, I'd like to run some tests. Sarah agreed. As the scanner worked, she watched the ongoing drama between the different alpha packs. More leaders had arrived during the night, and the debates were getting more intense. Some alphas were calling for Sarah to be executed as an example. They argued that allowing humans to break Kythera laws would destroy their society. Others pointed to the unprecedented behavior of the cubs and wondered if the humans had something important to teach them. The situation became critical when Alpha Drakmor arrived. Drakmor was the largest Kythera anyone had ever seen. He stood nearly 9 feet tall and was covered in battle scars. He ruled the Western Territories with absolute authority and had never been defeated in combat. "Enough talk," he growled as he entered the clearing. "The human broke our laws. She must die. Any who protect her will face my claws." The other alphas stepped back. Even Vexthar looked worried. Drakmor had killed dozens of opponents over the years. His pack was known for its brutality and violence. But as Drakmor approached Sarah, something unexpected happened. The cubs between him and the human camp didn't run away. Instead, they pressed themselves even flatter against the ground and began making louder, whimpering sounds. Some of the younger ones started crawling toward Sarah, seeking protection. Drakmor stopped, confused. Cubs were supposed to fear him. His own pack's youngsters scattered whenever he approached. But these cubs were treating the small human as their protector. "What sorcery is this?" he demanded. Professor Yithlak stepped forward bravely. "No sorcery, Alpha Drakmor. Ancient memory." The cubs recognized something in this human that we have forgotten. "Impossible." Cubs respond to strength and dominance. "This creature has neither." "Exactly," Yithlak said quietly. "And yet they trust her completely." "When did you last see cubs from different packs play together peacefully? When did you last see youngsters approach a stranger without fear?" Drakmor looked around the clearing. The behavior of the cubs was indeed unprecedented. They had formed mixed groups from different territories, something that never happened in normal circumstances. Dr. Vasquez's scanner beeped. She looked at the results with amazement. "Dr. Chen, your hormone levels are unlike anything I've ever seen. You're producing chemical signals that are almost identical to those found in mother mammals protecting their young." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "It means you're broadcasting safety and protection on a biological level. Every young mammal in the area recognizes you as a caregiver, not a threat." Professor Yithlak's ears perked up. The legends speak of the gentle fang having a scent that calmed all creatures, a presence that promised safety and healing. Sarah began to understand. Her medical training, her genuine desire to help others, her lack of aggressive instincts. Somehow these qualities were being communicated through her body chemistry in ways that spoke directly to the Kythera's deepest instincts. But Drakmor was not convinced. "Legends and science cannot change our laws." She touched an alpha's scar without permission. "The penalty is death." He started toward Sarah again, his claws extended. The cubs between them whimpered louder and pressed closer to the ground. Then something remarkable happened. Vexithar stepped between Drakmor and Sarah. "If you want to kill her, you must go through me. You would fight me over a human?" Drakmor snarled. "I would fight you over someone who saved my life and my pack." Other alphas began to take positions. Some stood with Drakmor, supporting tradition and law. Others moved to support Vexthar, influenced by what they had witnessed. But before the fight could begin, Morgatha spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Stop." Every alpha froze. Morgatha was the oldest living pack leader. Her word carried weight even with someone like Drakmor. "I have been consulting the ancient scrolls," she announced, "documents that have not been read for centuries. And I have found something significant." She approached the center of the clearing, carrying an old stone tablet covered in primitive Kythera writing. This tablet tells of the first compact, made when our people were young. It speaks of beings who could heal without harming, who could lead without dominating. The compact says that such beings should be honored and protected, not punished. Ancient superstitions. Drakmor growled, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Perhaps, but the cubs do not lie. Their response to this human is genuine and instinctive. They recognize something that we have forgotten." Sarah looked around at all the powerful aliens debating her fate. She realized that this moment would determine not just her survival, but the future relationship between humans and Kythera. "May I say something?" she asked quietly. The clearing fell silent. "I don't know about ancient legends or genetic memories. I only know that when I see someone hurt, I want to help them. When I see children scared, I want to protect them. Maybe that's what your cubs are responding to. Maybe that's what the gentle Fang really was. Just someone who cared more about helping than about following rules. She looked directly at Drakmor. You can kill me if you want, but it won't change what happened. It won't make the cubs forget what they've learned. It won't stop other humans from wanting to help when they see suffering. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the smallest cubs, barely old enough to walk, broke away from its group and crawled towards Sarah. Its parents called out in alarm, but the tiny Kithara ignored them. The cub reached Sarah and curled up against her feet, making contented purring sounds. Drakmor stared at the scene. In all his years as an alpha, he had never seen anything like it. Cubs feared strangers. They hid from anyone not of their pack. Yet this youngster treated the human like a trusted family member. Slowly, grudgingly, Drakmor lowered his claws. The cubs have spoken, he said finally. Perhaps it is time for new laws. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the new medical facility built in the heart of Kithara territory. Through the wide windows, she could see something that would have been impossible before she touched Vexthar's scar. Cubs from different packs were playing together in the courtyard below. Their parents watched peacefully from nearby, no longer separated by ancient territorial boundaries. Adult Kithara from rival groups worked side by side, building new homes and sharing resources. The changes had not come easily. After Drakmor's reluctant acceptance of new laws, the real work had begun. Traditional alphas struggled with the idea that strength was not the only way to lead. Some packs split apart as members chose, between old ways and new possibilities, but the cubs continued to respond to humans, with the same peaceful recognition they had shown Sarah. More human medical teams arrived, and each time, the young Kithara reacted with trust and calm acceptance. Dr. Vasquez had published her research on human hormone patterns and Kithara genetic memory. The scientific community was amazed to learn that some human caregivers naturally produced chemical signals that matched ancient Kithara legends. It suggests that the gentle Fang legends might have been based on contact with early human explorers. She had explained to Sarah. Perhaps thousands of years ago, before either species had advanced technology, some humans reached this world and interacted with primitive Kithara. The theory explained why only certain humans triggered the response. Sarah and others like her, people whose natural instincts focused on healing and protecting rather than competing or dominating, carried the right chemical signatures. Professor Yithlak had become Sarah's closest friend among the Kithara. He spent his days teaching human researchers about Kithara culture while learning about human medical practices. The cubs have taught us something important, he told Sarah, as they watched the mixed groups playing below. We forgot that cooperation can be stronger than competition. We forgot that healing is more powerful than harming. The new medical facility was a symbol of that learning. Humans and Kithara worked together to heal injuries and diseases that had once been death sentences. The building itself was designed as a collaboration, combining human technology with Kithara architecture. Vexthar appeared in the doorway behind them. His scar was now barely visible, a thin white line that he wore with pride rather than shame. Under the new laws, scars had become symbols of survival and growth rather than weakness. Sarah, he said in much improved English, the Council is ready for you. The Council of Packs was another innovation born from the Cubs' response to humans. Instead of territorial alphas ruling through force, representatives from different regions met regularly to discuss problems and share solutions. Sarah followed Vexthar down the hall to the great meeting room. Inside, 23 pack leaders sat in a circle with an equal number of human representatives. At the center of the circle was a small group of cubs from various territories. The cubs had become advisors in their own right. Whenever the council faced a difficult decision, they would watch the cubs' reactions to different proposals. The youngsters had an uncanny ability to sense which choices would lead to cooperation and which would cause conflict. Ambassador Rodriguez, now serving as the human liaison to the council, stood as Sarah entered. Dr. Chen, we have a situation that requires your expertise. Sarah took her seat in the circle. In the months since the incident, she had become something between a diplomat and a counselor, helping both species understand the changes they were experiencing. 3 new packs have requested admission to the cooperative, Rodriguez explained. But they come from the far southern territories where the old ways are still strong. Their alphas are having trouble accepting that humans can participate in pack decisions. Sarah looked at the cubs in the center of the circle. 2 of them were from the southern territories, brought by their packs as part of the diplomatic mission. Even now they showed the same peaceful response to her presence that had started everything. "What do the cubs tell us?" she asked. Morgatha, now serving as the council's elder advisor, spoke softly to the young ones in their own language. The cubs responded with happy chirping sounds and moved closer to the human representatives. "They trust without reservation," Morgatha translated. "They see no threat in cooperation between species." One of the southern alphas, a fierce-looking female named Kreshta, growled her frustration. "The youngsters are too naive. They do not understand the complexities of territory and resources. Or maybe they understand something we've forgotten," suggested Dr. Kethara, who had become one of the strongest supporters of the new ways. Sarah stood and approached the cubs. As always, they responded with calm acceptance, some of them purring softly. She knelt down and gently examined a small cut on one cub's paw. The injury was minor, but she cleaned it carefully and applied a small bandage. The cub's parents, members of Kreshta's pack, watched nervously at first. But as their youngster relaxed and played happily with cubs from other territories, their anxiety faded. "This is what the cubs understand," Sarah said, returning to her seat. "Healing doesn't recognize boundaries. Kindness doesn't care about territory. When someone is hurt, you help them. When someone is afraid, you comfort them. It's not complicated." Kreshta studied the scene. Her own cub was now playing with youngsters from packs that had been enemies for generations. There was no aggression, no competition, just the simple joy of friendship. "The human speaks truth," admitted another southern alpha. "Our cubs show us a path we had abandoned." The formal vote was unanimous. The 3 southern packs would join the cooperative, bringing the total to over 40 different territories united under the new system. As the meeting ended, Sarah walked out onto the facility's main balcony. The sun was setting, painting the forest in golden light. Below, hundreds of Kethara and dozens of humans worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old laws. Vexthar joined her at the railing. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Touching my scar that night? It changed everything for both our peoples." Sarah thought about the question. The changes had not been easy. Some humans struggled to work with aliens who still had predatory instincts. Some Kethara found it hard to trust beings they had once seen as weak prey animals. But then she looked down at the courtyard, where human children who had arrived with their families were playing alongside Kethara cubs. The 2 species had developed games that worked for both groups, creating friendships that crossed the boundaries of biology itself. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. Sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing. But the cubs knew the truth from the beginning. We just had to learn to listen to them." A year later, the first joint human Kethara deep space mission launched from the forest moon. The crew included both species, working together to explore unknown regions of the galaxy. Sarah was not on board. She had chosen to stay and continue her work with the medical teams. But in the cargo hold of the ship, a special compartment had been built for the mission's most important crew members. A group of young Kethara cubs who would help the explorers remember the simple truths that had transformed 2 civilizations. The cubs knew what the adults sometimes forgot: that the universe was big enough for everyone, that different didn't mean dangerous, and that the best way to touch another being's scars was with gentleness, not force. As Sarah watched the ship disappear into the stars, she touched the small scar on her own hand, a memento from her early days working with nervous Kethara who were still learning to trust. Like Vexthar's facial scar, it had become a symbol not of injury but of healing. The human had touched the alpha's scar, and every cub in the den had lowered its ears and lay down. In doing so, they had taught both species that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of compassion. The universe was a little less violent and a little more kind because one doctor had refused to let protocol stand in the way of healing, and in the end that made all the difference.